Hello, everyone. Rob here, Director of Events and Marketing at Power to Fly, ready for another wonderful conversation with an amazing leader. And in fact, we have Shana Ayabe here with us to discuss career reinvention and making a professional pivot. So, Shauna is the founder of Grace Media Digital, a media and marketing company built for the AI era. With more than a decade of marketing and communication experience as a former senior vice president and head of marketing and asset management, Shauna now leads a venture that sits at the intersection of media, marketing, communications, and technology. At Grace Media Digital, she and her team craft AI assisted content assets that amplify voices, strengthen brands, and connect organizations to audiences with precision and impact. She has built high performing marketing teams from the ground up, led public relations for this asset management firm with over 100 billion in client assets during her tenure, and spearheaded high profile communications for M&A initiatives, earning that firm industry recognition, including Deal of the Year. So, Shauna, wow, what a bios. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, I said, you've had quite the career there, and your career has really evolved in
Mhm.
interesting ways. What first prompted you to consider reinventing yourself professionally? Was there a specific moment, that lightning strike moment, or realization that pushed you to make that kind of change?
I don't think there's ever one moment for anyone. I think it's a
Hmm.
series of moments that accumulate over time. And then there's a single kind of trigger that will ultimately tip the scale. And so I've ultimately reinvented myself twice. One from right out of school, worked at a law firm, used to write settlement briefs, demand letters, mediation briefs, and arbitration briefs for attorneys. Thought I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 8 years old. I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer, then I'm going to be a judge, and that's what it's going to be. And then after 4 years in a law firm, just realized like this is not what I want to do. And so it was sort of a, well, then what? Because my whole kind of idea of what success looked like for me and what that career looked like was going to be in the law field. And so then I ultimately ended up trying finance, and I actually took a job as a marketing assistant going into finance just to get my foot in the door. So ultimately, decided finance was now going to be the path for me. And when I made the pivot from one finance firm to another finance firm, I actually took a 2 month break in between because I was just entirely burnt out. And I think the commonality between both of these pivots was value disalignment. So at some point in time, my professional values and my personal values no longer aligned with where I was at. And so that was really the catalyst. And then there's always a personal moment that I think tips the scale. So in my latest one, it was actually, I ended up experiencing a health issue, and I actually have a heart surgery tomorrow. And that was the big catalyst for me of like, okay, now the value disalignment has accumulated again. And I think everybody goes through those like few months, even up to a year of trying to contemplate, do I stay or do I go?
Hmm.
And then something tips the scale. So for me, it was, the health situation. And then I decided I'm going to pivot out. So if I had to just like really sum it up in that one sort of, what is that one theme that makes people pivot? It's that value alignment, whether or not you're still career aligned and personally aligned with where you're at.
Yeah, and I think we've seen more and more of that really since the COVID pandemic, where really folks are focusing more on that value alignment. And what we say to a lot of our community members is when you are interviewing for a new position, yes, they are interviewing you, but you should also be interviewing them. Is this the value alignment that you want? And I think in the even recent past, we hadn't kind of seen that back and forth but it's become so much more prominent and typical now.
hmm And I think there's kind of, in this market, it's now an employer's market. Before it used to be
Hmm.
an employee's market. And so you don't, there's the fear of, well, what if I'm out of work for a long time and I don't get hired right away? Then what? I'm going to be in a situation where I'm pressured to just pick something for the sake of picking something. I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing. Sometimes you actually need to make a lateral move in order to get a vertical jump. And sometimes that's within your company. Most times it's not within your company. Once you kind of hit like a point in your career where you're not seeing a path up, right, left, or center very easily, the path laterally or going to another company in general is usually the path. But people, I think, get fixated that it's a setback if I have to take
Hmm.
something that's lateral. In markets like this, I think that's actually going to be more common than not because there's such a saturation of competition and everybody wants to land their forever job. But I don't think that's the case in this environment anymore. It's really about finding something that's good for now that's going to allow you to upskill because this environment really demands your ability to be able to continue to learn.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And when we pulled our own community, upskilling actually had more value on it than even salary. People are really valuing upskilling right now. It's so key, especially for a career pivot. So when
Mhm.
people are thinking about that career pivot, they are often worrying about starting over, as you said. And we're hearing that all the time, moving from one career, one industry to another. How do I move over my experience? How
Yeah.
did you identify which skills and experience from your previous work are actually transferable?
So the final career sort of weight that was making me decide I wanted to pivot before my health situation was the reality that marketing is drastically shifting with AI. As somebody who's
Mhm.
been in marketing for over a decade, I knew that it was imperative for me to continue to upskill or become obsolete. And in my career, I always sort of, make jokes about how the boomer generation had a hard time adapting with technology and therefore they end up kind of getting like pushed to the wayside, if you would, when big decisions are being made with tech. Well, now I was starting to become in a position where I might become the
Mhm.
dinosaur if I don't continue to upskill. And with being in finance, there's, as a growth company happens, the bigger you get, the more red tape and bureaucracy there is. And I didn't feel like we were moving fast enough in order to adopt AI and be able for me to learn effectively enough where I felt like 5 years from now, I might now be in a position where I'm stuck in my job and don't feel confident enough to pivot because I haven't upskilled. So I think it's really important, like when you're thinking about reinventing, I kind of call it like the potato principle, which is in order to grow more potatoes, you take an existing potato that starts to spud roots, you plant it, and it creates more potatoes. And that's exactly how your skill set is. So in my instance, it was I knew communications was a little bit more evergreen as it relates to my skill set. I knew relationship management and being able to manage as a manager and run budgets and be able to look at data. All of that was still going to be immensely valuable in an AI world. Marketing, however, I knew was now, I'm no longer an expert, I'm a student. And that's the approach that I took into it. So, and that seems to have been true. Like as I've transitioned, my communications, my relationship building, those skills, managing budgets, cost analysis, data analysis, all of that, still those core foundational skills have carried with me, but the marketing has completely evolved. Like every day I'm
Mhm.
learning something new. I'm looking at a new tool. I'm seeing how I can do something faster related to the marketing world.
I love that. And the nice thing is, I think for that upskilling, there's so many resources for folks now. There's this summit, there's your amazing podcast, the exit interview. There's all these things that people can access for free to learn
Yeah.
about what's happening in trends. If you want to do a course, that's great too. But there's a lot of places to kind of wade into the water there before you maybe jump into the deep end of the pool and spend significant money on a boot camp or something along those lines.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is,
And
there's lots of resources out there now.
Yeah, but that change though can feel very risky, as you said. A lot of people
Mhm.
just get stuck in that moment because they don't want to take that leap. They have families that rely on them. So, what were some of maybe your biggest doubts or obstacles that you faced when you made that professional pivot, and how did you work through them?
Yeah. I mean, the honest answer, I think, for everyone that people don't like to say out loud is, am I good enough? Am I good
Hmm.
enough to go out and do something on my own or get another job or work for another company? That is typically the question that comes up in everyone's head that gives them that doubt of like, and then the second one is usually the what do I want to do? And I don't think you have to have like a complete plan when you decide to pivot. I think if you're Googling when is it time to leave my job, it's probably time to leave your job. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
if you're constantly having conversations with your family members and jostling it, it's probably time. You know, I think everybody has to kind of go through that deliberation period, but it's careful to not make it analysis paralysis and then you're not able to move forward. The easiest way, I think, to get comfortable with deciding if you're ready for that pivot after you know you should pivot and kind of lowering down those fears is to really take a look at your financial situation. And you should do this anyway. Like right now, nobody's job is safe. Titles are not holding the level of security that they used to. Everyone should be operating as if, like, what happens if I lose my job tomorrow? And part of that means doing a real financial analysis of how many months do I have of runway if I lost my job tomorrow? And if you
Mhm.
have that and you have an idea of what that is, then the next question is if I'm looking for another job at another company right now, what is it looking like that time period is of the average of people to get a job? And it's roughly somewhere between 6 and 8 months or a little bit longer, depending on how senior you are. For senior people, it could be over a year. So you have to kind of understand those two things. And then that gives you at least like a reality of the board you're about to enter to play the game, if you would. So
I
once you
love that.
understand your landscape, then you get more comfortable with like, oh, okay, either you're going to find out I have more runway than I thought. And maybe I should actually take advantage of this. Or, you know what, I don't actually have as much runway than I'm comfortable with. So, what can I do alternatively? And the answer to that should always be take advantage of the resources your company is providing you and outside resources that are available to you in order to position yourself for a pivot later.
I love all of what you said. It's also reminding me advice that we often give to people is go in and update your resume, your
Mhm.
LinkedIn, what have you, once a quarter. Take a look at what you have there. That way, if there are those surprises, like you said, we all have to be ready. We're not scrambling at that moment. We have something
Mhm.
updated. If we just worked on a project, it's nice and fresh in our mind, and we can update things in real time. So I think having that sense of preparation is so key to any kind of career pivot or career surprise that we might have.
Yeah, and I think people wildly undervalue the power of developing your personal brand, particularly on
Mm,
LinkedIn, while you're currently employed. You should be on LinkedIn being an active participant, not a LinkedIn lurker. So many people like to be LinkedIn lurkers. And what that is just kind of like watching what other people are doing. The problem with that is that you also get LinkedIn envy. You start to see people getting promoted that maybe you were like, hey, wait a minute, why is that person getting promoted? Like, I feel like I'm more qualified than that person. Or you see somebody who already left doing better than you, then you get FOMO. Or you're seeing like another company and there's disruption coming your way that potentially could impact your family and your job. And so you end up getting all of these like emotional responses from viewing the content on LinkedIn. If you focus your time on building your personal brand, and that means commenting on things that are relevant to whatever your expertise or specialty is on. You don't necessarily have to be the one always producing the content, but if you're an active participant on commenting on LinkedIn news articles or commenting on professionals in your space or reposting something, you can start there as like easy steps. Then when recruiters are looking you up, you get more inbound
mm,
opportunity as
mhm.
opposed to waiting for you to be constantly reaching out when that time comes. You want to be in a position where you're getting at least 1 to 2 recruiter calls a month organically, even if you're not ready to leave. And you do that by just putting yourself out there in the ethos of LinkedIn, building your personal brand.
I love that. That is such great advice. And with our job fair that are connected to many of these events, hopefully people are able to utilize that as well. But when you're looking back, were there relationships, were there mentors, networks? We talked about LinkedIn just now that played an important role in helping you reinvent your career. And how should people think about building those kind of connections? Because often for underrepresented professionals, they just struggle a lot more with building those kind of connections.
Yes, it is so important when you're in an organization to put in the time to build relationships with people more senior than you in your department, and also sister departments is
Mm.
wildly helpful because those are the people that if you need a reference letter, if you're trying to, get a good word in for a job, if you see that they left the company later and there's a job at that company you're interested in, those are people you can safely go and talk to and ask for support from. And also, you'll see if you work well with those people and you've done good work for those people, you don't have to sell yourself because they already know you, they already know your work ethic. So it's another sort of like reverse inbound opportunity for you. Now, relationships, you have to put in the time and you have to water them, and they shouldn't be transactional. You shouldn't just try and build a relationship with someone for the goal of it being transactional. But what you should do is just make genuine connections and remember that you can reach out to those people once you decide to leave. They could be two-way street. I have very, very good relationships with a few of my bosses, one of which is a strategic advisor in my current company. That's how close of a relationship I had. I actually, when I decided to tell him to leave, he convinced me to stay a little bit longer. And then I said, okay. And then I said, no, actually, I'm ready to leave. And by the way, I have this idea for a company. I'd love for you to be involved. And he is. And so, that to me is super valuable because we worked together for 8 years. We grew a company $80 billion together, and he knows my work ethic. And I kind of carried over the camaraderie that I had with him at my last company into my new business, which helps keep me motivated and makes me not feel so isolated. And a lot of those other colleagues that were in my sister department that I had kind of mentioned at previous jobs, even, when they found out I was going off on my own, they reached out and said, hey, you know, I heard you're starting a business. If you ever need capital, let me know. I don't know what you're doing, but I know you can get stuff done. And so I'm in. And I was like blown away. And that's simply because they just already knew what my work quality was like from years before and us staying in touch and having a relationship. I think an also underutilized asset is the consultants you work with at your existing company that your company hires could also be resources for you when you get out. There are consultants I worked with where I'm still in connection with, where I go to them, they're tech companies, they're tech consultants, and I'll go and bounce ideas off of them or ask them how they ended up growing and scaling, and they provide that information. So also remember when you're working with outside vendors, those are also relationship points for you as well if you work well with them.
I think this is all great advice that you're sharing throughout. And yeah, there's all these hidden connections, like you said, these vendors that we're working with that we don't maybe they don't necessarily come top of mind, but when we're thinking about everyone that we can work with, and we've got so many entrepreneurs in our community. So hearing this amazing aspect that you can get folks investing in your company from previous companies that you worked with is great. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about Grace Media Digital because you're at
Mhm.
the intersection of media, of marketing, of AI. How much of that direction came from deliberate planning versus following unexpected opportunities, let's say?
Yeah, it's kind of a 50-50 split because Grace Media was never the idea. It was actually, I knew I was going to start a podcast first, and I decided to build a company specific for that podcast. So I do have a company that's the exit interview, in addition to the actual podcast itself. I knew that podcast I wanted to create, replicating before I created a podcast at my last firm that I had 15 people on my team helping with the production of that podcast. I said, I want to replicate that quality or higher with 4 people and AI, including myself. And so that's what I've done. And then I decided I want to replicate that process and then be able to help other smaller wealth managers who don't have the budget for big marketing teams in order to produce their own podcast. And I can help them during that process. And so then I did. And then I decided somebody actually recommended to me, you should start a bigger company for this and then not just pigeonhole yourself with just podcast production. You should think about other media, content, social, personal branding, movies, etc. And I said, "Oh, that's fascinating." And then as I saw the landscape kind of growing with AI, I decided there's actually probably an opportunity for this. And so then Grace Media was born. And
Mm.
so Grace Media is the parent company of all the different sort of products that we're producing as we produce our own content for our specific for our podcasts and other things that we're doing.
That's amazing. And I've heard other people taking kind of similar routes as well. So I think
Yeah,
it's great to hear. And it's also inspiring for other people to hear, oh, I can do it. And also, I love the idea of starting with this podcast and then it can grow into something else. You don't necessarily, again, need to leap into the deep end of the pool right away. You can
right.
test the waters and see what else is out there. But if you did have to kind of go back in time and give
Mhm.
yourself, at any moment, maybe before you made this pivot or something like that, if you
Yeah.
had to give yourself a piece of advice at that time, looking back with everything that you know now, is there a specific piece of advice you'd give yourself?
You know yourself best.
Mm,
I think we so often listen to everyone else's opinions that we forget what we know best. So you know yourself best. And a lot of times we seek other people's opinion to help build confidence in our decision. But sometimes you just need to make the decision because you know yourself best. And I think that, the fear of failure a lot of times is what holds people back. But if you fail, you've still done more than the person who never tried. And so that's something important to remember. And also know that there's never a true failure because even during the trial process, before hitting that like quote unquote failure, you did so many things that you would have never previously done. And you've also learned a lot of things along the way. So you've created more potatoes in your life, right? You've created more skills in your life. And now you just have another potato to plant and grow more potatoes. And that's really what it is. It's like the potato is actually one of the easiest crops to grow because it doesn't need much and it can live in
mhm.
all types of different types of soil. And so skills are sort of like that. They never go away. You just keep developing them, developing them, developing them. So there's never really a true failure. And so you just have to trust yourself that you know that this isn't for me anymore. It's time to leave. And there's going to be a growth process during that. And not everything is going to look the way that maybe you thought it would, or maybe you can't even see what it might look like. And that's okay. You just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I think like the beauty of this environment, as destructive as it has been, seeing AI kind of grow, it's also really like fascinating to see that it allows everyone to just trial and error, grow,
Yeah.
connect, build. And you're not an outlier at all, So there's actually a whole community of people right now that are going back to sort of that student mindset and learning and growing and building. And I think like it's like life used to be you're a student first, then you're a doer, then you're a manager, and then eventually you're like the executive, right? And now it's sort of that doer is being replaced by AI and the manager is getting compressed by AI and everybody has to go back to being a student. So it's
Mhm.
sort of like a sensei and a student mentality. It's you have to just know that it's always going to be a learning curve and there's no like we're going to stop here and now I think people think like it's exhausting to think about continuing to learn. And that's what like holds people back also. But if you think about it, don't think about it as a task that must need to be completed. Think about it as like this is going to help you develop more joy in your life.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think people are also exhausted when they're thinking about AI specifically. It's
Yeah.
everywhere. Oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. But what we always tell everyone is just start. You're not going to break it. You're not going to also ever learn everything about it.
Yeah.
So just start somewhere and then see where it goes. And I think you're so right. Myself, so many other people I know, I who is not at all technologically inclined, like myself, have started to discover all these things about just playing around with AI and how it's transforming the work that I do and we do here at Power to Fly every day. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, so much of us are becoming those students that you
Yeah.
mentioned.
And I think unpopular opinion, perhaps, but there's this kind of thought of, oh, I'm falling behind. I'm behind because AI is moving so fast. I actually think quite the contrary. You're never behind because everything is changing
Yes.
so much. So there's not a bad time to start because
Yeah.
you're
If you
not
learn one
behind.
tool today, it's going to be gone tomorrow,
That's
maybe. So
right.
you never know.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. And last question for you, Shauna, is as what are you thinking about reinvention today? Now that you have Grace Media Digital, you have all these other projects. Is it something that still happens just maybe once in your career? Or are you continuing to evolve? What are you thinking about when you think of that word reinvention now?
I think reinvention is forever happening. And
Mm.
we call it growing up in, age statuses, but really if you think about it, the person you were when you were 20, you're not the person you were now, right? Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, you've evolved as a person. I think the career aspect of that just needs to be accepted as one. Like you're always going to be different phases of yourself reinvented over time. And that may look different drastically, or it could slightly look the same. But I don't think it's something we should fear. I think it's something it should be accepted that this is just part of life. Reinvention is normal. Instead of it being like, oh my God, I have to reinvent, I have to start all over again. You're not starting all over. You're just growing up professionally.
Yes. Oh, that. It's a great place to end on. Before I let you go, Shauna, where else can people connect with you, learn more about your podcast, learn more about Grace Media Digital? Let the people know.
Yeah, if you can find all of our information, including our podcast, on the exitinterviewpod.com. And you can also find us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, Shana Ayabe on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to connect with you and help you any way I can.
Amazing. And if you're watching this live, we will have those links in our post summit blog post. If you're watching the recording later, well, that post is already live. So just go to powertofly.com and you can have the links there. Thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation and best of luck on all that you're doing.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate it.